When my husband ran off with my sister, he left me penniless and mocked me for clinging to our dying son. 4 years they paraded their perfect life while I scrubbed floors to survive. 15 years later they sneered, asking if the boy had died, until he walked in tall and unbroken. Their faces? Pure defeat. Still scrubbing floors, Susan? Maria's voice cut through the grocery store 15 years after she'd stolen my husband. She stood there examining organic tomatoes while I held my last $20, Carl beside her with his success gut and designer clothes. We heard George died years ago. Such a tragedy. That's when my 6'3" son walked through the automatic doors in his Georgetown medical sweatshirt. Before we dive deeper, thank you for being here to witness these stories of survival and strength. If you believe families should protect, not poison their children, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more mothers who need hope. Now let me tell you how we got here. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got here. How my sister and husband built their happiness on the foundation of a child's suffering. It started 3 years before they left, on an ordinary Tuesday when Maria's heels clicked across our worn linoleum floor. I was making spaghetti, George's favorite, steam fogging the kitchen windows while Carl wrestled with the sink pipes underneath. My sister swept in without knocking. She never knocked anymore. Designer purse hitting our scratched counter as she launched into another breakup story. Marcus was a narcissist, she announced, though Marcus had seemed nice enough when he'd paid for our dinner last month. Thank God I have family. Real family. She touched Carl's shoulder as he emerged from under the sink, her hand lingering. You're so good with your hands, Carl. Susan's lucky. The way she said my name like it was an afterthought. The way Carl's ears turned red. I should have known then. 2 weeks later, Dr. Morrison delivered the diagnosis that would change everything. The office smelled like disinfectant and that particular brand of dread that clings to medical buildings. George sat on the examination table, legs swinging, 7 years old and oblivious while the doctor explained about white blood cells and treatment protocols. But it was Maria who sobbed. Loud, theatrical sobs that made the nurse bring tissues. She clutched George against her chest, mascara running in perfect streams. My precious nephew, she wailed. I'll do anything. Anything. Carl sat frozen beside me, his hand cold in mine. I thought he was in shock. Looking back, maybe he was calculating how long he'd have to pretend to care. Maria inserted herself into our medical routine with surgical precision. She volunteered to drive George to appointments while I worked. She researched special organic diets that cost 3 times our grocery budget, insisted they were essential, guilt me when I hesitated. She picked up prescriptions, organized medications into color-coded containers, became the expert on George's condition while I became the absent mother working doubles to pay for it all. You need to rest, she'd say, shooing me out of my own kitchen. I've got George's dinner. It's a special recipe I found online. Costs a fortune, but he's worth it, right? Right. Except the fortune was ours to lose. Carl started missing bedtime. First once a week. Construction emergencies, he said. Then 3 times. Then I was reading Harry Potter alone to George while Carl's truck stayed gone until midnight. His phone lived face down on the nightstand. He showered the second he came home. When I asked about the new cologne, he said a client gave it to him. Maria wore the same scent. I found him in the garage one night, shoulders shaking. For a moment my heart softened. The stress was getting to him too. Our son was sick. Our marriage was straining. But when he turned, his tears looked practiced, like he'd been rehearsing in the rearview mirror. I can't lose him, Susie, he said, using the nickname he hadn't called me in years. Sometimes I think about running away from all this. We don't run, I told him. We fight. For George. He nodded, pulled me close, and his shirt smelled like Maria's perfume and something else. Guilt maybe, or decision already made. The charity fundraiser was Maria's masterpiece. She organized everything at St. Catherine's, our church, the one where Carl and I had married 8 years earlier. She printed flyers with George's school picture, the one where he was smiling despite the bruises that mysteriously appeared whenever Maria watched him. Help George fight, the posters said. Every dollar counts. The entire community came. Our neighbors, Carl's construction crew, my co-workers who could barely afford gas but still dropped 20s in the donation box. Maria stood at the podium in a dress that cost more than our monthly payment, dabbing her eyes with precision. Family means everything, she said, her voice carrying across the fellowship hall. When Susan asked me to help, I hadn't asked. I knew I had to step up. George is like my own son. Her hand found Carl's shoulder. We all have to sacrifice for the ones we love. The photographer captured them standing together. Carl's arm around Maria's waist while I was in the bathroom, George throwing up the special smoothie she'd made him. $12,000 raised that night. I thought it would save us. I didn't know Maria was already siphoning it into an account I'd never see. 3 months before they left, I worked the night shift at Cincinnati General, mopping surgical floors while George slept in the break room. Maria had insisted on preparing his weekly medications, special compounds from a pharmacy 2 towns over. Carl had started sleeping in the spare room, claiming my schedule disturbed his sleep. Our house felt like 3 separate lives intersecting at doorways, nothing more. Mrs. Patterson from next door would later tell me she'd seen Carl's truck at the Hampton Inn. Multiple times. Always afternoons when I was working and George was at school. Maria's car in the same lot. But Mrs. Patterson thought it was for work. Carl did construction estimates after all. Maria was probably helping with the business side of things. The business side. That's what they were calling it. George got sicker whenever Maria watched him. I noticed the pattern but blamed coincidence. Stress. Bad luck. The vitamins she brought came in prescription bottles with typed labels. Official looking. The diet she supervised cost hundreds we didn't have. Carl said we'd manage. He'd take extra jobs. Maria offered to loan us money, then acted hurt when I hesitated. I'm trying to help, she'd say, tears perfectly timed. Don't you trust family? Family. The word she wielded like a weapon while she poisoned my son and planned her escape with my husband. While she counted the charity money and calculated how long to keep George sick enough for sympathy but well enough to abandon. The last Sunday before they left, we went to church together. All 4 of us, like a mockery of the family we'd never really been. George dozed against my shoulder during the sermon about faithfulness. Carl checked his phone 6 times. Maria sang the hymns too loudly, her voice cracking on Amazing Grace, while she held the hymnal between her and Carl, their fingers touching on the spine. I should have seen it all. Monday morning, 6:17 a.m. 3 days after that church service where Maria sang too loudly. My key stuck in the lock like always and I had to jiggle it twice before the door opened. The apartment was wrong immediately. Too quiet but not the peaceful quiet of everyone sleeping. This was hollow, like walking into an abandoned theater. Carl's work boots weren't by the door. Maria's purse wasn't on the counter where she'd taken to leaving it during her overnight help sessions. The coffee maker was cold, unprogrammed when Carl always set it for 5:45. George was still in his bed, tangled in his dinosaur sheets, breathing steady. Relief flooded through me so hard my knees buckled. Whatever else was wrong, George was here. Safe. But his nightstand looked different. The medicine organizer Maria had bought was gone, along with the special water bottles she insisted he use. The note waited on the kitchen table, held down by Carl's wedding ring. Maria's handwriting, the same loops and curves that had signed my birthday cards for 32 years. George's illness is destroying everyone. We deserve happiness too. Carl and I have found something real. We can't watch him deteriorate anymore. It's too painful. The apartment is paid through the month. His medications are in the cabinet. We're sorry, but we need to save ourselves. Don't try to find us. Both their signatures at the bottom. Carl's looked rushed. Maria's was perfect, like she'd practiced. I read it 4 times before my brain accepted the words. Then George's voice broke through. Mommy? He stood in the hallway, dragging his stuffed T-Rex, hair sticking up in 8 directions. Where's Daddy's truck? He had to go to work early, baby. But his lunch is still in the fridge. And he took the Xbox. His voice cracked. The Xbox isn't for work. That's when I saw what else was missing. The flat-screen TV. Carl's golf clubs. The good laptop. Maria's jewelry box she kept in our bedroom for safekeeping. They'd loaded up like thieves while their sick nephew slept down the hall. Why did Aunt Maria take her medicine box? George asked. She said I needed it every day. She said. He started coughing, that wet sound that had haunted our nights for months. But this time it sounded different. Forced. Like he was making himself cough because that's what sick kids did. I pulled him against me and he felt so small, all sharp shoulder blades and thin arms. Did Aunt Maria say goodbye to you? No. But I heard them last night. Carrying stuff. Daddy dropped something and said a bad word. He pressed his face into my stomach. Are they coming back? I don't know, baby. Did I do something wrong? I took all the medicine. Even the ones that made my tummy hurt. My vision blurred. 7 years old, and he thought their abandonment was his fault. That somehow his illness, the very thing they'd orchestrated, had driven them away. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. Sometimes adults make selfish choices. Like when Daddy ate your birthday cake last year? Yeah. Like that. But bigger. We sat on the couch, George curled into me like he was trying to disappear. I should have been making breakfast, getting him ready for school, checking his temperature. Instead, I held him while the morning light exposed everything they'd taken. The empty spaces where pictures had hung. Carl had taken the ones of himself but left our wedding photo, his face scratched out with something sharp. I'm hungry, George finally said. Can I have regular cereal? Not the special one Aunt Maria makes. You can have whatever you want. He chose Lucky Charms. Maria had banned them, said the sugar would interfere with his treatments. He ate 2 bowls while I watched, memorizing his face, the way his eyes weren't as sunken as yesterday. When he smiled, milk dripping down his chin, he looked like a normal kid. Not the dying child Maria had crafted. The bank was my next stop. George waited in the car with his dinosaur while I stood at the ATM, certain the machine was broken. $17. That's all that remained of our savings, our checking, everything. The emergency fund we'd built over 5 years. Gone. George's college account my mother had started with $1,000 before the cancer took her. Emptied. The receipt printed out like a verdict. Withdrawals starting 3 weeks ago. 500 here. 800 there. The final cleaning yesterday while I worked and George slept. Even the quarters in his piggy bank would be more than what they'd left us. The teller inside pulled up our history. Joint accounts, she explained apologetically. Carl had every right. The credit cards were maxed out too. Charges at hotels, restaurants, a jewelry store. They'd been spending for weeks while I counted pennies for George's medicine. Can you put a hold on anything? I asked. I'm sorry, ma'am. There's nothing left to hold. Back home, George had fallen asleep in the car. I carried him inside, all 42 pounds of him, his fever already climbing again. But different this time. Like his body was confused, trying to be sick because that's what it knew. Mrs. Patterson knocked while I was making soup from a can. She stood at our door with her own pot of something homemade, her face creased with concern and barely contained gossip. I saw the moving truck, she said, pushing inside. At 4 in the morning. Thought it was strange. Moving truck. Well, Carl's truck. But loaded up like moving day. She set her pot on my stove, eyes scanning our emptied living room. Susan, honey, I need to tell you something. My stomach dropped. What? I've seen them. At the Hampton Inn off Route 9. Multiple times these past weeks. Middle of the day when you were working. He touched my hand. Maria's been staying there. Saw her key card myself when she dropped it at the mailboxes. Room 237. Been charging it to your Southwest credit card. How long? 6 weeks, maybe more. I hoped I was wrong. Thought maybe she needed space from her latest breakup. Mrs. Patterson's voice dropped. But Carl's truck was there too. Every Tuesday and Thursday. Like clockwork. Tuesdays and Thursdays. Maria's special pharmacy run days for George's medications. The days she insisted I work doubles to cover the cost. I should have said something sooner, Mrs. Patterson continued. But she's your sister. I thought. You thought family meant something. She nodded, tears in her own eyes now. Honey, that's not all. She had a man over last month. Not Carl. Someone else. Driving a Lexus. She introduced him as her fiancé. The room tilted. Maria had been playing everyone. Even Carl apparently. Or maybe that was part of their game too. How many lives could they demolish while building their own? George whimpered from his bedroom, calling for water. His special water bottles were gone, so I used a regular glass. He drank slowly, carefully, like Maria had trained him to do. Mommy, are we gonna be okay without them? I looked at his pale face, the dark circles Maria had literally fed him, the trust still somehow alive in his eyes despite everything. We're going to be better, I promised, though I had $17, no job security, and a sick child who might not even be sick. That promise to George hung between us for 3 days while I scrambled to keep us afloat. Then Thursday came and with it the phone call from Jefferson Elementary that changed everything. Mrs. Brennan? George collapsed in pee. The ambulance is taking him to Cincinnati General. I abandoned my mop bucket in the middle of the bank's marble floor, my supervisor yelling about docked pay as I ran. The taxi cost $8 I couldn't spare, leaving me with $9 to my name. George was conscious when I arrived, pale and confused in the pediatric ward, and $4 dripping into his thin arm. Just a little dizzy spell, the ear doctor said, barely looking up from his tablet. Probably his leukemia. Follow up with his oncologist. But we didn't have an oncologist anymore. The specialist Maria had found mysteriously couldn't see us without insurance, and Carl had canceled our policy the day he left. That's when she appeared, Dr. Patricia Hawkins walking past our curtained area, then stopping, backing up, staring at George like she'd seen a ghost. She was older, maybe 60, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. That child doesn't have leukemia, she said quietly, stepping inside. Excuse me. My protective instincts flared. His medical records. Hey, She gestured toward George and something in her voice made me nod. She examined him gently, his eyes, his fingernails, the bruising on his arms. She pressed carefully on his stomach, checked his lymph nodes, studied his skin tone under the harsh hospital lights. Who diagnosed him? She asked. Dr. Morrison 2 years ago. And who's been managing his treatment? My sister. She researched everything, handled his medications. I stopped, the words turning sour in my mouth. Dr. Hawkins pulled the curtain fully closed. I run the free clinic on Vine Street. Bring him tomorrow night after we close. 9 o'clock. Bring every medication, every bottle, every record you have. Why? She looked at George, then back at me. Because that child is being poisoned and I think you know it. The next night I sat in her locked clinic while she spread papers across her desk like evidence in a crime scene. George was in the examination room with a nurse, eating his first real meal in days. Chicken nuggets without Maria's special sauce. These blood tests from Dr. Morrison, she began, adjusting her glasses. They're fabricated. The letterhead is wrong, the medical terminology is nonsensical, and this signature? Dr. Morrison retired 4 years ago. He's been in Florida since before George was supposedly diagnosed. The room spun. But we went to his office. What office? The building at that address has been a shopping complex for 5 years. My mind raced backward. Maria had driven us. Maria had walked us inside. A small office, oddly empty, just one man in a white coat who looked at George for maybe 10 minutes before delivering his death sentence. Cash only. Maria had handled it, said insurance would reimburse us later. These supplements, Dr. Hawkins continued, holding up the bottles I'd brought. 3 of them are from websites that sell alternative medicine. They contain heavy metals, not enough to kill quickly, but enough to cause every symptom of childhood leukemia. Fatigue, bruising, weakness, pallor. She showed me printouts from medical journals, matching George's symptoms to heavy metal poisoning, not cancer. This one, she held up a white bottle, contains thallium. Rat poison essentially. Minute doses. This green one has arsenic compounds. Just enough to keep him sick. I made it to the bathroom before vomiting, my body rejecting the truth as violently as it wanted to reject the last 18 months. My sister had poisoned my baby. Methodically. Deliberately. While smiling at me over morning coffee. When I returned, Dr. Hawkins had created a timeline on her whiteboard. George's worst days aligned perfectly with Maria's pharmacy runs. His improvements came during her supposed spa weekends. The pattern was undeniable, mathematical in its cruelty. We need to flush his system, she said. Stop all medications immediately. I'll treat him here off the books. If we report this now without proof of who did it, they'll take George away from you. But Maria is gone. We need documentation first. I'll run real blood work every 3 days, document his recovery. In 2 weeks you won't recognize him. He was right. 10 days without Maria's poison, and George's transformation was miraculous. His skin went from gray to pink. He ate without vomiting. He ran in the apartment without gasping. His bruises faded. The dark circles disappeared. He gained 4 pounds in 2 weeks. Mom, I feel weird, he told me one morning. Weird how? Not tired. Is that normal? My 7-year-old son had to ask if feeling healthy was normal. That's what they'd done to him. Dr. Hawkins documented everything meticulously. Blood work showing declining toxin levels. Photographs of his recovery. A detailed timeline of his poisoning. She risked her license taking samples to an independent lab, paying from her own pocket. 18 months of systematic poisoning, she said during our 4th visit. They wanted him sick enough for sympathy and donations, but not so sick he'd need real hospitalization where real doctors might notice. The charity fundraiser, I whispered. $12,000. Blood money. Literally. 3 weeks into George's recovery, I was cleaning offices downtown when Janet from payroll found me in the break room, her phone extended like a weapon. Susan, you need to see this. The Facebook post was dated 6 months after Carl and Maria vanished. A memorial page for George Brennan, beloved son, taken too soon after his brave battle with leukemia. Photos of him from when he was sickest, pale and hollow-eyed. Maria standing at a podium in a black dress, Carl beside her, both crying perfectly staged tears. The comments destroyed me. Hundreds of people offering condolences, sharing memories of the sweet sick boy, donating to their new charity, George's Wings, supporting families through childhood cancer. They killed him off, Janet said gently. In everyone's mind, your son is dead. I scrolled through post after post. Memorial trees planted. Scholarships in his name. A 5K run with his picture on every shirt. Carl and Maria had built their new life on the foundation of George's fictional death, profiting from a grief that wasn't even real. But he's alive, Janet said. That's what matters. I looked at the date of the memorial service. 2 weeks after they'd left us. They hadn't even waited for him to actually die from the poison they'd fed him. They'd simply decided he was more valuable dead than abandoned. Dr. Hawkins helped me print everything. The posts, the charity registration, the donation pages. Evidence of a crime so elaborate I still couldn't fully grasp it. They'd poisoned a child, faked his death and profited from both. What do I do? I asked her. You survive, she said. You raise that healthy boy. And when the time is right, the truth has a way of surfacing. That night, George drew a picture of himself as a superhero, strong and tall, cape flying. This is me when I grow up, he announced. You're already my hero, I told him. Why? Because you survived something impossible. He considered this. Mom, was I ever really sick? The question I dreaded. Someone made you sick. But you were never dying, baby. You were always stronger than they thought. He was still clutching that superhero drawing when the eviction notice arrived 2 days before Christmas. The paper trembled in my hand while George hung his handmade ornaments on our Charlie Brown tree, a scraggly thing Mrs. Chin had rescued from behind her restaurant. 3 months behind, the notice said. Final warning. I'd been working 3 jobs. Nights at the hospital, mornings at the bank, weekends at a dental office. But it wasn't enough. Not with the medical bills still coming from George's fake treatments, the maxed credit cards Carl had left us with, and groceries that cost more each week. What's that, Mom? George asked, noticing my face. Just paperwork, baby. Mr. Kolsky's office smelled like cigars and Old Spice. He sat behind his desk, massive hands folded, while George and I stood like defendants awaiting verdict. George was 10 now, 3 years since they'd left, but still small for his age. The poisoning had stunted his growth, Dr. Hawkins said. You owe me $3,000, Mr. Kolsky stated. I know. I can pay $500 now, and... You said that last month. George stepped forward. Please don't make us leave. Mom works really hard. Mr. Kolsky looked at George, really looked at him. Saw the second-hand clothes, the backpack held together with duct tape, the way he stood protective beside me like a tiny bodyguard. You go to Jefferson Elementary? Yes, sir. My grandson goes there. Tony Kolsky. George brightened. Tony's nice. He shares his lunch sometimes. Something shifted in the old man's face. You the kid Tony says doesn't have lunch? My cheeks burned. I pack him lunch. Crackers isn't lunch, Mr. Kolsky interrupted. He studied us for a long moment. I own 7 buildings in this area. They need cleaning. Professional service wants $8,000 a month. You do it for rent plus $2,000. Deal. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Start tomorrow. Bring the kid if you need to. And that's how I became the queen of toilets. 7 buildings, 42 bathrooms, countless floors to mop. George would sit in supply closets doing homework, reading by the light of his phone that barely held a charge. Sometimes I'd find him asleep on a pile of clean towels, his math book still open. By February, George had taken over our household completely. He'd figured out our scheduling chaos and adapted like a tiny general managing a war. "Mom, you have bank at 6, hospital at 3, sleep from 9 to 2, he'd recite while making scrambled eggs. He'd learned to cook from YouTube videos on the library computer. Nothing fancy but enough to keep us fed. Pasta with butter. Grilled cheese that only stuck to the pan half the time. "You should be playing video games," I told him one morning watching him pack our lunches. "This is better," he said simply. "We're a team." When his teacher called asking about his father for a Veterans Day project, George answered without hesitation. "He died in Afghanistan. A hero." The lie came so naturally I almost believed it myself. It was easier than explaining that his father was living 40 minutes away with his aunt, pretending he was dead. Some nights I'd come home to find George had reorganized our tiny space, trying to make it feel bigger. He'd moved the couch to catch more light, hung sheets to create a bedroom area, labeled everything in the kitchen so I could find it half asleep. "We don't need them, Mom," he'd say when he caught me crying into my coffee at 4 a.m. "We have each other." Dr. Hawkins became our guardian angel. Every week she'd check George for free, monitoring his recovery, making sure the toxins were fully flushed. She taught me which generic medicines were identical to brand names, which symptoms to watch for, how to spot nutritional deficiencies. "He needs protein," she'd say, then slip me grocery store gift cards. "For my research," she'd claim, though we both knew there was no research. One April afternoon she pulled up Carl's company website on her computer. "You need to see this." There was George's school photo on their charity page. "In loving memory of George Brennan, whose brave battle inspired our mission." Below it, donation buttons and tax-deductible giving options. "They're using him to get government contracts," Dr. Hawkins explained. "Companies get preferences for hiring people who've experienced family tragedy. Carl's playing the grieving father. But George is alive. Which is why I'm documenting everything. Every visit, every blood test, every photo." She showed me a folder 3 inches thick. "When you're ready, this proves everything." When will I be ready? When George doesn't need protecting anymore. When you're stable. When the truth can't hurt you worse than the lie already has. The stability came from unexpected places. Mrs. Chin, who owned the restaurant below us, started her kindness campaign in March. Mistaken orders appeared at our door 3 times a week. Always warm, always George's favorites, always with extra portions. "I didn't order this," I'd say. "Mistake already made," she'd insist. "Cannot waste food." Her daughter Jenny, a high school senior, started tutoring George in math. Her husband, Mr. Chin, fixed our perpetually leaking sink, our broken window lock, the door that wouldn't close right. "I should pay you," I'd offer. Mrs. Chin would wave me off. "Family helps family. Real family, not the blood kind that poisons children." He knew. The whole building knew. The walls were thin and George's nightmares weren't quiet. The times I'd sobbed on the phone to Dr. Hawkins. The eviction notices. They all knew, and instead of judging, they circled around us like a protective wall. George thrived in this makeshift family. Jenny taught him algebra and Mandarin curse words. Mr. Chin showed him basic repairs, letting him hold the flashlight and pretend to help. Mrs. Chin fed him until his cheeks filled out. "Mom, are we poor?" George asked one night, both of us on the couch that doubled as my bed. "Financially, yes. But not the other kind." "What other kind?" "The kind where nobody loves you." I pulled him closer. "No, baby. We're rich in that." That conversation about being rich in love happened on a Tuesday. By Thursday, George had transformed our tiny apartment into a science lab, and I knew we'd turned a corner neither of us had seen coming. "Mom, remember how Aunt Maria used to give me those vitamins?" He was 13 now, growth spurt finally hitting, his voice cracking between words. "I want to understand what she did." He'd salvaged an old microscope from Jefferson Elementary's equipment purge, set it up on our kitchen counter between the hot plate and the toaster that only worked if you held the lever down. Library books about toxicology towered beside it, tagged with colored sticky notes he'd peeled and reused until they barely stuck. For school? I asked. For the science fair. And for me. 3 months he worked on that project. Every night after I'd collapse from my cleaning rounds, I'd find him hunched over data sheets, comparing chemical compounds, creating charts that tracked his own symptoms against known poisoning patterns. He titled it When Medicine Becomes Weapon, Detecting Fabricated Illness in Pediatric Patients. You can't mention Maria or Carl, I warned. I won't. But Mr. Davidson says if I place at state colleges notice. Even middle schoolers. Mr. Davidson, his science teacher, had become George's champion without knowing the full story. He'd stay after school helping George refine his hypothesis, teaching him to cite sources properly, never asking why a 13-year-old knew so much about medical fraud. The night before the state fair, George practiced his presentation for me and the Chens. He stood straight, spoke clearly, his anger transformed into academic precision. When he reached the slide showing how certain compounds could mimic leukemia symptoms, Mrs. Chin gripped my hand so tight it hurt. He won. Not just his category, the whole thing. Grand champion. The judge, a professor from Ohio State, pulled me aside afterward. Your son's research is graduate level. Has he experienced medical trauma personally? Something like that. She nodded knowingly. The best scientists often come from pain. He's going places. George framed that certificate and hung it where our family photo used to be, the one Carl had scratched his face from. This is better, he said. This shows who we really are. 2 weeks later I was cleaning the Brennan Build's office. Carl's company had moved into the Fitzgerald building downtown, all glass and chrome, trying to look bigger than it was. I cleaned there Tuesday nights, usually alone except for security. But this Tuesday, someone had left their office unlocked. Carl's partner, Tom Morrison. Papers covered his desk and my eye caught George's name. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. Contract proposals, all of them. Bids for city projects, state construction, private developments. And in every single one, a section about community involvement that told the story of Carl's tragic loss. His son George, dead from leukemia, how it motivated Carl's commitment to children's charities. I started photocopying. Page after page, proposal after proposal. Carl had built his success on George's fictional grave. Won contracts worth millions by playing the grieving father. The charity he'd created, George's Wings, appeared in every bid as proof of his company's values. The security guard found me an hour later, arms full of copies. You're not supposed to be in there, he said. I know. I'm sorry. I thought I saw a mouse. He looked at the papers, then at me. Recognition flickered. You're George's mom. The kid who won the science fair. My daughter goes to Jefferson. I nodded, unable to speak. Mice are terrible this time of year, he said slowly. Better take those papers outside to check for droppings. Wouldn't want them back in the office if they're contaminated. He walked away and I understood. The whole city knew our story even if they didn't know the details. At home I spread the contracts across our floor. Dates, amounts, promises to donate, percentages that never materialized. Dr. Hawkins had been right. Evidence mattered. This file grew thicker each week as I found more documents accidentally left in trash bins or recycling. Janet started forwarding me Maria's social media posts. I couldn't look at them myself, she'd blocked me everywhere, but Janet screenshot everything. Look at this, she said, showing me her phone during my break. Maria posed with twin boys, maybe 4 years old, in front of a house that screamed suburban wealth. Blessed with these miracles after so much loss, the caption read. Teaching them about their angel cousin George who watches over them. She's using him even dead, Janet muttered. But I noticed what Janet had mentioned. Carl wasn't in recent photos. Maria's wine glass appeared in every image, sometimes multiple glasses in one photo session. Comments were turned off after someone had written, "Didn't George's mother say he was alive?" The facade's cracking, Janet said. Her sister commented last week about Maria being between situations again. 3 months before George's high school graduation, the letter from Georgetown arrived. Full scholarship. Complete ride. Everything covered. I need to read you something, George said, holding his application essay. We sat at our tiny table, the one Mr. Chin had fixed 3 times, and George read. At 7 I was dying, not from disease but from the people who were supposed to love me most. My father and aunt poisoned me slowly, keeping me sick enough to profit from sympathy while my mother worked 3 jobs to pay for treatments I never needed. He didn't know. He trusted family. When they abandoned us, leaving me to actually die from their toxins, my mother saved me with nothing but minimum wage and maximum effort. She scrubbed toilets while I did homework in janitor closets. She gave up sleep, food, any chance at her own life to give me mine. I study medicine not despite this trauma but because of it. Somewhere, another child is being hurt by people they trust. I will find them. I will save them. Because my mother taught me that love isn't about blood or marriage certificates. It's about who shows up when showing up is all they have left to give. We cried until Mrs. Chin knocked on our door, worried we were hurt. Then she cried too, and Mr. Chin had to come collect her. But not before she'd made us promise to frame that essay. "You did it, baby," I told George that night. "We did it," he corrected. "And we're not done yet." He looked at the file of evidence I'd been building, now 3 boxes full. "When?" he asked. "When you're safe. When you're at Georgetown. When the truth can't touch your future." He nodded, understanding. We'd waited this long. We could wait a little longer. The truth had been patient with us. We could be patient with it. The patience we'd promised ourselves lasted exactly 1 week after that conversation. Then Linda Morrison called. "You don't know me," she said, voice tight with barely controlled fury. "But Carl Brennan destroyed my husband's business, and I think you're the only person who might understand why I need him to burn." I stood in our kitchen, George at his desk studying for finals, and listened to a stranger explain how my ex-husband had apparently perfected his con artist routine. "Tom was Carl's partner for 3 years, Linda continued. "Carl used your son's death, sorry, fake death, to win sympathy contracts. When Tom questioned where the charity money went, Carl bought him out for pennies, then stole his client list. We lost everything. What do you want from me?" "Justice. I have recordings, Susan. Carl bragging about the tax breaks, about how genius Maria was for thinking of it. I have proof he's been skimming from his own company. But nobody believes the bitter ex-partner's wife. They might believe the mother of the dead child who isn't dead." George looked up from his textbook, sensing the shift in my voice. I nodded at him. "It's time." "What kind of recordings?" I asked. "Carl drunk at a bar, telling his new partner how they pulled it off. Maria's voice is on one of them too, laughing about how you actually believed the diagnosis. Tom recorded everything after Carl forced him out. He knew we'd need evidence. We met at a diner 2 towns over, Linda sliding a USB drive across the table like we were spies. She looked exhausted, rage keeping her animated. "He destroyed 4 other businesses the same way," she said. "Always using George's story. The grieving father act. One contractor killed himself after Carl stole his contracts. Why haven't you gone to the police?" "With what? Hearsay? Business disputes? You have the medical proof. I have the financial proof. Together." That night, George listened to the recordings on headphones, his face hardening with each word. Carl's slurred voice talking about selling tragedy, Maria laughing about the perfect prescription cocktail she'd researched. "I want to tell our story," George said, pulling off the headphones. "Not theirs. Ours." He started the blog that weekend. "Living After Death, a survivor's story." He was 18, heading to Georgetown in the fall, old enough to speak his truth. The first post was simple. "I died when I was 10. At least that's what my father told everyone. He held a memorial service, started a charity in my name, built a business on my grave. The only problem? I was alive, living above a Chinese restaurant with my mother, recovering from systematic poisoning by the people who were supposed to love me most." He didn't name names, but the details were specific enough. The charity called George's Wings. The construction company that won humanitarian awards. The aunt who became a stepmother. The vitamins that weren't vitamins. 3 days later, Channel 6 called. Then Channel 11. Then the Cincinnati Enquirer. The story of the boy declared dead while still breathing was irresistible to media. George turned them all down except for one. A podcast about medical abuse that promised to let him tell the story his way. The episode dropped on a Tuesday. By Wednesday it had 1 million downloads. "People are asking questions," Janet told me at work. "Carl's company Facebook is getting bombarded." Someone found the memorial page. Dr. Hawkins moved faster than the internet. She'd been building her own case for years, and George's blog gave her the opening she needed. She forwarded everything to the Medical Ethics Board, the State Licensing Department, Child Protective Services. I'm not letting them practice their evil anywhere else, she told me. That fake Dr. Morrison Maria hired? I found him. Real name is Marcus Webb, lost his license in Indiana for insurance fraud. Maria paid him $2,000 to play doctor for an afternoon. The investigation opened quietly. Forms filed, questions asked, documents requested. Carl and Maria didn't know yet, but their perfect world was already crumbling from the inside. Then Maria tried to reach out. Patricia, my mother's best friend before she died, called me on a Thursday evening. Susan, I need to tell you something strange. What happened? Maria contacted me through Facebook. Said she's been trying to reach you, needs to make amends. She claims Carl forced her into everything, that she never wanted to hurt George. What did you tell her? That you died. Heart attack from the stress 2 years ago. Figured she should taste her own medicine. And? Patricia's voice turned cold. She asked about life insurance. Whether George got anything. That woman hasn't changed a bit. George heard the whole conversation. She thinks you're dead? Apparently. He smiled, dark and satisfied. Good. Let her think she won. Makes the truth hurt more. The cracks spread faster now. Janet forwarded me screenshots of Maria's increasingly frantic posts. Wine bottles multiplying in photos. Carl absent from everything recent. The twins looking neglected, hair unwashed, clothes too small. Comments from concerned friends asking if she needed help. Someone had leaked George's blog to Maria's charity board. Suddenly George's wings was under review. Donors demanding answers. The IRS sniffing around their tax-exempt status. Linda called weekly with updates. Carl's new partner had started asking questions about the books. Clients were pulling contracts. The humanitarian award they'd won was being reconsidered. He's drinking heavily, Linda reported. Tom saw him at 3 different bars last week. Day drinking. Alone. But the real crack, the one that would shatter everything, came from an unexpected source. One of Maria's twins, only 4 years old, had been admitted to the hospital with suspicious symptoms. Bruising. Fatigue. Familiar patterns. Dr. Hawkins called me immediately. She's doing it again. Different hospital, same playbook. Those poor boys. Not for long. The ethics board was already investigating. This just accelerated everything. They're removing the twins tomorrow. I sat with that information, feeling the weight of those 2 innocent boys caught in Maria's web. History trying to repeat itself, but this time people were watching. This time there were files and recordings and blog posts and a survivor named George who refused to stay buried. Mom, George said that night, looking at his Georgetown acceptance letter. When I'm safely at school, we release everything, right? Everything. Good. Because I just got an email from a journalism major who wants to write her thesis on our story. He found the memorial page, the charity records, my blog. She's connecting all the dots. The truth was spreading like wildfire, and Carl and Maria didn't even smell the smoke yet. They were still living in their crumbling kingdom, unaware that the boy they'd declared dead was about to rise from the grave they'd dug, bringing receipts. The journalism student had sent her questions just that morning, and I was still thinking about them when I walked into Kroger at 7 p.m. with my last $20 and a handful of expired coupons. 15 years of shopping at the same store, always at the same time, after my evening cleaning shift before the night one. I knew which cashiers would pretend not to notice expired coupons, which aisles had the best markdowns, how to make $20 feed us for 3 days. I was comparing dented cans of soup when I heard it. That laugh. Maria's laugh, tinkling and false like wind chimes made of glass. The same laugh that used to fill my kitchen while she poisoned my son. My body recognized them before my brain did. Every muscle tensed, fight or flight flooding my system. There, by the organic produce that cost more per pound than I made per hour, stood Carl and Maria. Time had changed them, but not enough. Carl had gained weight, success weight, his polo shirt straining across a belly built by business lunches. Maria looked preserved, like she'd been sealed in suburban privilege. Botox, smooth forehead, highlighted hair, designer handbag that could pay our rent for 2 months. They were loading their cart with wine bottles, the kind with corks instead of screw tops, laughing about something on Carl's phone. Living their perfect lie life while I stood there in my clearance rack jacket holding soup I couldn't really afford. I should have walked away. Should have gone to self-checkout and disappeared. But 15 years of silence suddenly felt heavier than my fear. Still scrubbing floors, Susan? Maria had spotted me first, her voice cutting through the distance between us like she'd been waiting for this moment. She looked me up and down, taking in my discount store uniform, the exhaustion I wore like a second skin, the way my hands were still cracked from bleach despite all the lotion Mrs. Chen gave me. We heard George died years ago, she continued, examining organic tomatoes with theatrical interest. Such a tragedy. Carl turned then, his face going through several expressions before settling on smugness. Sue. Well, still in town. Still alive, I said, walking closer. Disappointing, I'm sure, since you held my funeral. Maria's laugh was nervous but still condescending. You heard about that? It was closure, Susan. For the community. George's funeral, I corrected. You buried my living son for sympathy points. Carl shifted his weight, trying to look casual. How are you managing? Must be hard alone. I manage. Floors don't scrub themselves. Maria's eyes gleamed with cruel satisfaction. Still cleaning? After all these years? God, Susan, I told Carl you'd never amount to anything without us. Some of us work, I said. Instead of stealing. Carl laughed, that confident sound of a man who'd never faced consequences. Stealing? We took what we deserved. A life. A real life. Not whatever tragedy you were dragging us into with that dying kid. He leaned against their cart full of $60 wine. Speaking of which, did the boy ever actually die, or are you still milking that story? The store seemed to pause. The music kept playing, but everyone nearby had stopped moving. A mother with 2 kids pretended to study pasta labels. An elderly man froze mid-reach for bananas. The teenage cashier at Register 3 was holding her breath. You want to know about George? I asked softly. Maria rolled her eyes, adjusting her designer purse. Susan, please. The dramatic pause. We've moved on. We have real children now. Healthy children. That's when the automatic doors opened. George walked through like karma itself had taken human form. 6'3" now, built strong from years of making up for lost growth. His Georgetown Medical School sweatshirt worn like armor, every step confident, measured, purposeful. He saw me first, our eyes meeting across the produce section. Then he noticed them. The tomato Maria was holding slipped from her hand, hitting the floor with a wet sound that seemed to echo. Carl's mouth opened but nothing came out. They stared at George like he was a ghost they'd personally murdered, which in a way he was. Mom, George said, walking over with deliberate calm. You okay? Maria's designer purse hit the floor. Carl grabbed the cart for support, his knuckles white against the handle. Hello, Aunt Maria, George said evenly. Dad. You're alive? Carl's voice cracked like a teenager's. Disappointed. George asked. I know you told everyone I died. Even had a service. Mom showed me the program. Beloved son taken too soon. Weird thing to print about someone you abandoned while he was supposedly dying. Maria was backing away slowly, her hand reaching for Carl's arm. This isn't possible. You were sick. Terminal. No, George said, his voice never rising but somehow filling the entire store. I was poisoned. By you. Dr. Hawkins figured it out. The vitamins you insisted on? The special meals? You kept me sick for sympathy, for money, for the attention it brought you. Other shoppers had given up, pretending not to watch. A circle had formed, loose but definite. The teenage cashier had her phone out, recording everything. You tortured a child for Instagram likes, George continued, each word precise as a scalpel. You dosed me with heavy metals to fake leukemia. You raised money from generous people and pocketed it. You held a memorial service for a living child to win construction contracts. Carl tried to puff up, some remnant of his old bluster surfacing. Now wait a minute. No, George interrupted. You wait. You ran off with your wife's sister. You left us with nothing. Mom scrubbed toilets while you built your empire on the foundation of our suffering. She never missed a treatment I didn't need, never missed a school play, never let me forget I was loved despite what you did to us. Maria was crying now, but it looked rehearsed, like she'd practiced in mirrors. George, we were young. You were adults, he said. Adults who chose cruelty and called it love. Adults who are now standing in a Kroger, facing the son you buried alive. The store manager had appeared, watching from the bakery section. 2 more employees stood by customer service. Nobody intervened. This was better than anything on their security cameras. "We should go," Carl muttered, trying to push their cart away. "You declared me dead for convenience," George said, not moving. "Built a charity on my grave. Won contracts with my suffering. But here's the thing. Mom gave me the antidote to your poison. It's called love. And it's something you'll never understand." Maria's tears had ruined her makeup, black streams down her preserved face. "We made mistakes." "No. Mistakes are accidents. What you did was attempted murder." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Carl grabbed Maria's arm, pulling her backward, their abandoned cart blocking the aisle. They stumbled toward the exit, but the teenage cashier was still filming, and her voice carried clear across the store. "Oh my God, this is already at 50,000 views." Maria turned back, mascara-stained face twisted with panic. "You're recording this. The whole internet is watching," the girl said, not lowering her phone. "You're viral." They fled then, leaving their wine and organic produce behind like evidence at a crime scene. George stood perfectly still until the automatic doors closed behind them, then his shoulders finally relaxed. "You okay, baby?" I asked. "Better than okay," he said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like his dorm room and instant coffee. "I've waited 15 years for that." By the time we got home, George driving because my hands were shaking, his phone was buzzing nonstop. The video had jumped from TikTok to Twitter to Facebook to the evening news. 2 million views by midnight. 5 million by morning. The comments section became a courtroom of public opinion. People who donated to George's Wings demanded refunds. Former employees of Brennan Builds shared their own stories. Someone found the memorial page and posted screenshots beside current photos of George at Georgetown. "Listen to this one," George read from his phone over breakfast. "My company lost a bid to Brennan Builds because of his sob story about his dead son. We were a veteran-owned business, but apparently fake death beats real service. Linda Morrison called before noon. Carl's biggest client just pulled out. $40 million project gone. His partner Tom is filing charges this afternoon." The dominoes fell fast after that. The IRS opened an investigation into George's Wings within a week. The state licensing board suspended Maria's charity registration. Their twins' private school called an emergency meeting with parents after someone, definitely not me, sent them the video with a concerned note about the safety of the boys in Maria's care. Carl's first drunk call came 2 weeks later, 2:47 a.m. I let it go to voicemail. "You ruined everything," his slurred voice said. "My business, my family, my reputation. Are you happy now? Are you finally happy?" I deleted it without listening to the rest. His suffering wasn't my concern anymore. It wasn't even satisfying. It was just nothing. White noise from a life I'd left behind. 3 months later, Carl filed for bankruptcy from a Super 8 motel. Linda sent me the filing papers with a sticky note. He listed the memorial flowers for George as a business expense. Maria tried reinventing herself online. New Instagram, new name, posting about rising from trauma and starting fresh after toxic relationships. But the internet has a long memory. Every post got flooded with screenshots of George's memorial page, links to his blog, that grocery store video playing on repeat. The investigation into the twins revealed what we'd feared. The same pattern starting again. Mysterious symptoms, special vitamins, Maria's tears perfectly timed for maximum sympathy. The boys were placed with Carl's mother, who'd apparently known something was wrong but had been too afraid to speak up. "At least they're safe," George said when we heard. "They have a chance now." Spring arrived with acceptance letters and new beginnings. George got into Johns Hopkins for his pediatric oncology fellowship. Full scholarship again, his essay about identifying medical child abuse in pediatric settings catching the attention of the selection committee. His Georgetown graduation was everything the grocery store confrontation wasn't. Planned, peaceful, perfect. I sat in the auditorium wearing a dress Mrs. Chin had altered for me, surrounded by the family we'd built from scratch. The Chens, Dr. Hawkins, Janet, even Mr. Kowalski had come, grumbling about parking but wiping his eyes when George walked across the stage. In his valedictorian speech, George stood at that podium where Maria had once performed her fake grief and spoke truth instead. 15 years ago I was dying, not from disease but from the people who were supposed to protect me. I stand here today because one woman refused to let me disappear. She worked 3 jobs, sacrificed every comfort, gave up every dream of her own to save mine. My mother, Susan, taught me that family isn't about blood or marriage certificates. It's about who shows up when life falls apart. It's about who stays when leaving would be easier. Mom, this degree is as much yours as mine. The applause was thunderous, but all I could hear was my heart finally beating without fear. The celebration afterward was in our apartment above the Chinese restaurant. Mrs. Chin made enough food for 30 people though we were only 12. Jenny, now a teacher herself, brought her kids who called George Uncle Doctor. Dr. Hawkins gave him a stethoscope that had been her father's. Mr. Kowalski handed him an envelope with a check that made George's eyes go wide. For your mother, the old man said gruffly. Back pay for all that cleaning. With interest. We sat around our small table, the one held together with wood glue and prayers, laughing at stories that weren't sad anymore. The walls that had heard so much crying now echoed with joy. George's phone buzzed with a news alert. Maria had been arrested for fraud. Carl was living in his truck. The twins were thriving with their grandmother. None of it mattered anymore. You know what I realized? George said, raising his glass of Jenny's homemade wine. We won. When? I asked. The moment we survived. Everything else. The video, their collapse, the justice, that's just credits rolling. We won the day we chose each other instead of giving up. Mrs. Chin nodded sagely. Best revenge is good life. To good life, George toasted. To family, I added, looking around the table at these people who'd saved us when blood relations had tried to bury us. Later, after everyone left, George and I stood on our tiny balcony overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, Carl and Maria were living with their consequences. But here in this small apartment that smelled like sesame oil and love, we had everything. Thank you, George said quietly. For not giving up. Thank you, I replied, for being worth fighting for. We stood there in comfortable silence, 2 survivors watching the city lights, knowing that tomorrow George would leave for Johns Hopkins, and I'd finally sleep without worry, and the ghosts they'd created would stay buried where they belonged. This wasn't the life I'd planned. It was better. It was real. It was ours. If this story of justice finally served had you gripping your phone, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when George walked through those grocery store doors in his Georgetown sweatshirt, watching Maria and Carl realize their dead victim was very much alive. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Never miss an upload. Never miss an upload. Never miss an upload. Never miss an upload.